I don't have to do or be something in order to be loved. It's just that love is my reality. That's what it feels like to have a secure caregiver.
That's nice.
Wow.
All right.
Warm and fuzzy just hearing that.
Dear Shandy.
Welcome back to Dear Shandy listeners. Hello, Andy.
Hello.
How are you today?
Feeling very secure.
Oh, I was wondering if you were going to play on that. It's an exciting day. This is a topic that, frankly, I think we're like 2 years late to addressing.
Yeah.
We've been waiting for the right guest. We wanted only the very best.
And we hooked her.
Oh, we did. We got her. We securely got her.
Nice.
That was weak. I forget it. Okay, we are joined by licensed therapist with over 17 years of clinical experience under her belt. She's a teacher and the host of the Attachment Nerdcast. Love that. She can be found on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Attachment Nerd. And she is the author of Securely Attached, Transform Your Attachment Patterns into Loving, Lasting Romantic Relationships, and the upcoming, very exciting, Raising Securely Attached Kids Using Connection-Focused Parenting to Create Confidence, Empathy, and Resilience. We are thrilled to be joined today by Eli Harwood. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Anyone who wants to shoot the shit for hours about attachment, I'm in. Let's do this.
You have the best energy already. I feel like this topic, it could feel a little academic and maybe dry, but I love your content and how you educate everyone, but it feels like it's fun. It feels fun and like you're talking to a friend. And that's no small feat.
Well, and that's been my mission. I fell in love with the research 20 years ago and was like, everyone needs to know this. But not everyone is going to pick up a book titled Affect Regulation, Mentalization, and the Development of the Self because it makes you want to fall asleep for most folks. So I've been kind of going, how do I synthesize this incredible data we have? We have so much data. And it's so well done and validated data. It's not just some random person put on a study and then fed it up to the Daily Mail. It's really solid science. So how can I take what's happened over here and translate it so that we can help improve what's happening so that the next body of data comes back with higher percentages of security? That's our goal. I want to be on my deathbed and I want someone to say, Eli, we're at 70% secure now. We're at 75% secure now. It's no longer 40, 60, 50, 50, depending on the study.
Gotta love someone who knows what they want. I love that. Fantastic.
Very specific.
I have a quick disclaimer. Today's conversation is meant to be more anecdotal guidance and is not intended to substitute professional mental health counseling, diagnosis, or treatment, despite how qualified our guest is today. So, Eli, we're going to start very basic because I feel like the knowledge around attachment ranges from like you'll talk to a friend who you're shocked at how much she knows, and then you'll talk to someone else and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So for anyone new to the world of attachment theory, could you provide a baseline definition and maybe describe the different styles?
Yeah. So attachment is a drive in the human system. So we have a drive for safety, we have a drive for food, we have a drive for thirst, we have a drive for attachment. We are relationally oriented creatures. So the human baby has never once in the history of all humanity crawled out of the uterus and gone, I think I'm going to do this on my own. I'm going to go find some bark and some moss, right? So we are relationally developed, which is such an important key to understanding ourselves in adulthood, is being able to look back and go, what was the nature of what I experienced relationally? And how did that impact the way that I engage in my close familial relationships? So attachment really doesn't get activated in our interaction with the Target checkout clerk, right? We're going to have a different idea of what that relationship is. We're not looking for that person to, well, hopefully we're not in that moment, trying to make a bond, because that gets a little awkward. We're aware as human beings that we have these specific relationships that are different than our other interactions. These are our attachment figures, our close relationships. And what attachment theory posited back in the 1950s, starting with John Bowlby, really revolutionized by a woman, Mary Ainsworth, is this realization that what happens relationally early on in a child's development affects the way they conceptualize themselves, their emotions, others, relationships. It sets this foundation for the trajectory of their attachment throughout their lifetime. So to just kind of make this a really simple example, if a child grows up in a home where their relationship with their caregiver feels really difficult, tense, and uncomfortable, then they usually learn how to cope with that person in a way that is self-protective as opposed to relationally growing, right? So rather than going, oh, I'm going to use this person to help me feel regulated, seen, understood, supported, I'm going to feel belonging in this place, the child will adapt by going, it's better not to expect much from the people I'm close to.
Ooh.
And so now I'm going to go throughout my life trajectory, maybe having some of these close relationships. Maybe I have them because, it just feels nice to have someone else help me pay the bills or to have, sexual intimacy, but I don't actually know how to lean on someone. I don't know how to be known by someone. I know how to protect. I don't know how to connect. So that kind of gives you a picture. And that's just one picture. So I'll go through each of the kind of patterns. One thing I want people to know that is not very well popularized yet, so you guys can help me popularize this truth about attachment, is that we can have different attachment experiences with different caregivers. So I'm going to talk, you could have two parents or a grandma or an auntie, and based on who you're spending time with and how much, you might actually have two different attachment adaptations you take with you from childhood.
Oh, okay.
So as opposed to this develops into this one style and that, it's kind of like a, what Harry Potter character are you quiz?
Yeah.
It's more nuanced than that. Some people really do have that experience where maybe both of their caregivers growing up had a very specific way of relating and it was similar. And so they really develop that coping pattern with all of their caregivers. So then in adulthood, they really have one style. They can go, that's me. But for some folks, there's more nuance. There might have been one caregiver that was more secure, one that was more preoccupied. And so they get into adulthood and it's like, well, it kind of depends on who I'm with. It depends on what the other person is doing with me. And so it's more dynamic than sometimes it's talked about in pop culture.
Yeah, well, you answered a future question already, which was, can one have more than one attachment style, essentially? Yeah. You must get that all the time.
Yes. And it's also very confusing because we actually have two different bodies of research on attachment, but we talk about all of it in the same kind of realm. So I'm not going to bore you all with that. Just know that if you've ever felt like, it's being talked about a little bit differently here than here, it's probably because you've been in and out of the social psychology and the developmental psychology. But the way that I like to think of this, that I think is the most helpful for people, is to go, for sure, the way you developed in your early relationships affected what you believe about close relationships, how you utilize close relationships, what you believe about yourself and your needs. And for some of us, that's going to be more clear cut. Maybe there was just one message we learned. And for others, it's going to be maybe more nuanced. And when we have these adaptations, when we go into relationships in the present, it really does depend how the other person adapted in their environment, what gets activated in us.
Oh, you're preempting so many questions I have.
We already have an hour just on this.
Wow, that is so interesting. So it's activated depending on who you're with. So for example, someone who's already predisposed to being avoidant, if they're with someone who is naturally anxious, that might cause them to become more avoidant or?
Exactly. I have a colleague and a dear friend who I would say for all sakes and purposes, her experience was very secure growing up. And she coupled with someone who is very avoidant. And she talks about this experience that she had never had before of feeling preoccupied. It took her a while to even figure out what was going on because she'd never had to have those feelings before this partnership.
Preoccupied with
anxious. So preoccupied means anxious.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's a word I'm such a word nerd. So I always pick out the word that I think best exemplifies the dynamic.
You are in the right place, Eli.
Okay, let me break down the patterns. And then as we talk about this, we can go really specific into what happens when this person and this person and that person and this person.
It sounds like rock, paper, scissors kind of.
Totally.
I'm getting that
Does
feeling.
paper beat rock?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Except there's no beating.
There's no beating. Right. There's just learning and growing.
Yeah. Just growing.
Right.
There's two different ways we can look at this. And one is like, okay, let's go back. Let's look what happens in childhood. So I'm going to talk about that. And then I'm going to talk about how does that become what you're doing in adulthood. So in childhood, in the ideal setting, you have an attachment figure. You only need one of them. One attachment figure who is predictably warm, responsive, and grounded. So the experience as a child is I have these floods of emotions because children are just big balls of feeling. I have these floods of emotions. My caregiver is available to me. So they're close enough in proximity and they're attuned to me. They notice what I feel. They're able to stay calm in their bodies, but also warm in their bodies so that I know I can rely on this person to help me when I feel tender or in distress. That's the language of the research, tender needs and distress.
Mm-hmm.
So I internalize as a result, my needs are valid, my needs will be met. I can bring what I need to other people and they will show up for me. I don't have to do or be something in order to be loved. It's just that love is my reality. That's what it feels like to have a caregiver.
That's nice.
Wow.
Yeah, right?
Warm fuzzy just hearing that.
Right. So good. And by the way, that doesn't mean that the caregiver is never on their phone or never distracted or never annoyed or isn't like bedtime, go the fuck to sleep, motherfucker. Like those things are happening, but there's an attunement. There's a dance between the caregiver and the child where the caregiver really can recognize or read the child's internal world. They can tell, oh, you're really not okay, little bug. Okay, come here. I got you. I'm here. You know, it's okay to have those feelings. I'm going to help you learn how to put words to them. You're going to develop and grow without a big ball of shame around your emotional needs. Okay.
Oh, man.
This is what we're working towards as parents.
Goal.
Yep. And also in self-healing. So self-healing is like being able to look back at whatever it was your younger self had or didn't have and go, oh, that's what you needed. That's it. Like whether you were a hyper kid or a really introverted kid, it doesn't matter. You needed a caregiver who could read your internal world, connect with you, and regulate you so that you could feel secure. When a caregiver is able to do that, but not consistently. So that first category of secure parents, it's really key. Consistent, warm, available, steady. I am secure in myself as a caregiver. There's a second group of caregivers who are able to do it sometimes. So they're doing that just enough that the child knows it exists and wants more of it, as they should, but not enough that the child can predict it.
Ooh.
And so what happens is the
Slot
child...
machine.
Yes. I mean, intermittent reinforcement, the most effective form of torture. Ask the U.S. military, right? So I, as a child, know that there is this thing I can feel that feels good, that feels regulating, but I don't know why or how to get it. And so that child we label as insecure, anxious, ambivalent, or resistant. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry for the labels. It's so intense. So to make this simple, we will call this child anxious. There's actually another set. The avoidant children are also called anxious, by the way.
What?
Mind blown. This is the developmental research. So in the developmental research, insecure, anxious, ambivalent, resistant is one style, and insecure, anxious, avoidant is another style.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, no. Let's just keep it. One word.
No.
One word for each.
Okay, so we're going to call it anxious.
Are you resistant
Anxious.
to this, Auntie?
Yes, I am resistant.
Well, and then we
Anxious.
changed the names in adulthood just to fuck with everybody. So this anxious child, what they learn is, I can't trust when and how and where someone will show up for me. And so they adapt with a couple of different skills. So one of the skills they adapt with is they become hypervigilant. So they're scanning their caregiver's face. Are you here from now? Are you going somewhere now? How are you okay now? Do you love me now? Is everything okay now? Okay. I'm watching the dynamics between two of you, and I'm going to make some assessments later, but I just watched her look at you. Yes.
I was waiting for him to look at me back, but
I didn't.
You can read into
That's
that.
how secure I am.
He felt me looking at him.
Yeah.
I know you
scanning.
knew I was looking at you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, anyway, we'll talk about this.
It's super hard to hear you talk about all this and not apply it to yourself.
Well, that's the thing. I'm making an inventory of questions and they're all selfish.
Yeah.
Well,
so
do you know
I'm
what
trying
that is?
to get rid of the super selfish ones.
No. As it should be. All of the best research is me search. And when we hit that deeper understanding of ourselves, then we can translate to other people. And you bet your bottom's dollar that the one I was just talking about is my default setting. It's part of why you might notice I have extra details about it because I lived it. I say lived, and I will talk about this in a minute because it doesn't feel true of my nervous system anymore, but it did for a lot of years. So this little munchkin, scanning, hypervigilant. The other thing they're doing is they're attributing the experiences to themselves. I must have done something wrong that this person isn't giving me what I need. Something's not right with me. I need to be prettier, shinier, smarter, funnier, something to get this person to be more attuned to me. And so this belief develops that it's my job to make people love me. And I'm going to put my energy into being lovable and scanning to see if whether I did land it or not. And that's exhausting. And then the other skill this little munchkin develops, we call protest, which is this. Do you love me? Do you love me? The other person. Yeah, I love you. You only said that because I asked you to.
Oh, God.
Protest. It is. It's very annoying in adult relationships. It's super effective and adaptive in this early environment because this caregiver, for whatever reason, is not able to be predictable. And so the child has intuitively learned that it's maladaptive to soothe. If I soothe, you bounce. If I protest, you have to keep your attention on me for longer, which is adaptive because I cannot survive the saber-toothed tiger without you.
Wow.
So I'm going to annoy you into paying attention to me so that at least I don't die.
Oh my goodness. You are very good at doing
I gotta
that.
say, and this is nothing. We've had a lot of great guests on, but I feel
Fantastic
like
guest.
I have my hands right in the anus of this topic. Like it's right. I'm up in the colon.
I'm so happy to hear that.
This
it's
is
like
warm
the
and
compliment
moist.
I was looking for. Yes. If ever there was a place I wanted to be up in.
I mean, no, it's incredible. Like I feel like this encompasses everything. All of it. This is everything.
Yes.
I mean, can you imagine dinner parties with me? Every topic I'm like, well, so here's how that relates to
No.
Here's where that goes.
Do they not invite you anymore? Or you just
I think I collect people who find it as interesting as I do. So we all just
that's
sit
the way
around
to do it. Babbly babble, babbly bay. Babble will help you learn a language today.
It's true, Andy. Babbel, the language learning app. Is there a more productive way to spend 10 minutes a day on your phone? Seriously.
10 minutes that doesn't even exist.
No.
10 minutes is one session of looking at cat videos.
Or you could expand your horizons and become, I'm going to say it, inherently cooler.
Yeah. 100% cooler. Guaranteed.
Yes.
And no matter what level of coolness you are, if you have no coolness or massive amounts of coolness,
yes,
you automatically add coolness.
Yes.
It's like putting whipped cream on a sundae. It's not like you're taking something away.
No.
You're just adding it.
Yeah.
It's more good.
Yes. Because I think when someone knows other languages other than their native language, it shows effort, it shows curiosity, it shows a work ethic.
There have been times in my life, I swear, that I have known someone who I just don't really care for them. And then one day I hear them speaking a new language. I'm like, oh, I feel bad now.
Yeah,
I feel bad. I was wrong.
I was wrong.
Yeah, I
about
should
that
give them a
person.
second chance.
Yes.
And then I do. And then invariably I'm just like, nah, still suck. But they got a second chance.
So Babbel, in as little as 10 minutes a day, you can learn a language in as little as 3 weeks. Their lessons are crafted by 200 language experts. Plus, they have advanced speech recognition technology.
But it's not to be joked about.
Oh, pardon me. Did it sound like I was joking?
Don't say that in a facetious manner.
I'm sorry.
It has to be respected because this is where you actually learn to speak a language.
Yes.
Because I have learned in the past basic language, and I've gone to the country and they're like, okay, we'll speak English. Don't worry about it. Don't waste your time.
Yes.
But with Babbel, it's like having a private coach to help you with pronunciation, which is the most important part of language.
So we have a special limited time deal for our listeners, the Shandies. Right now, you can get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription when you go to babbel.com/dearshandy.
Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/dearshandy.
Spelled BABBEL.com/dearshandy. Rules and restrictions may apply. So Andy, we were recently traveling. We just got back actually. We're on PST currently.
Oh yeah.
And let me tell you, last night, you were sleeping on one side of me on the sofa and Ruby, our dog, was sleeping on the other side of me. And I was just awake. And while you were both snoring away, I went over to the kitchen and I made myself a hot cocoa. And I know that might sound counterintuitive, but because we're talking Beam Dream Powder, which is nighttime hot cocoa for sleep, it only helped me. It did not hinder me. Plus, I got to have a nice late night snack.
And when I woke up, you were sound asleep next to me, smelling of cocoa.
So my favorite flavor is the mint chip flavor. Andy, you're holding over the cinnamon cocoa, but they really have so many flavors to choose from.
I can smell it through the thing, but you have a tendency not to fully close things. So I'm getting a good whiff of this, and it is delightful.
I fully close things.
You don't. You always close them like a quarter of the way.
That's not true.
Yeah, you do. It's okay. It's a cute thing you do. Everything is open.
So our longtime listeners know that sleep is sort of a thing for me. It's often elusive for me. And I'm a big Beam Dream Powder fan, and that really cannot be taken lightly because I try all sorts of sleep supplements and often find that they do absolutely nothing. And so when I discovered that Beam actually worked for me, I was pretty stoked. And while other sleep aids can give you grogginess, we all know that feeling where the next day you are regretting
you're paying for it.
Yeah. I don't know if that's really a good payoff. Sometimes I'm like, okay, well, I slept, but I don't actually feel rested, so what was the point? Because Beam Dream Powder relies on an all-natural, powerful blend of reishi, L-theanine, melatonin, nano-CBD, and magnesium. You don't get that grogginess the next day. And the numbers do not lie. In a clinical study, 93% of participants reported that Dream helped them get better sleep.
And 7% were just jerks.
So we have a special deal for our listeners, the Shandies, on Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, their science-backed healthy hot cocoa for sleep with no added sugar.
Get 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/Shandy and use code Shandy at checkout.
That's shopbeam.com/Shandy and use code Shandy for up to 40% off.
Better sleep has never tasted better.
Okay. So you're getting this one. So if I was to give 2 words to each of these patterns, the first pattern, the secure pattern, the child learns to reach and receive. That's their attachment adaptation. If I'm in distress, if I'm tender, I'm going to reach for my people and I'm going to receive the care they give me, which will make me feel soothed. The second one, that anxious, we'll call them anxious, resistant, ambivalent, okay, child, their adaptation is reach and cling. I'm going to reach, but I'm going to protest that soothing part of the process. So I know how to reach, but I don't know how to receive. Okay? The third category of munchkins are the anxious, insecure, anxious, avoidant. So we'll call them avoidant kiddos. And the avoidant kiddos do not reach. And here's why. Their caregivers have been consistently unable to help them regulate those tender needs and distress. That caregiver can look actually a whole variety of ways. So it might be a caregiver who is deeply uncomfortable with emotional states and believes that emotions are indulgent. And so then when the child cries, their response is, "You're fine. That's enough of that." Okay. If you want to keep acting like that, you can go do that in the other room. Okay. Wow. That there's this rejection of emotional states and emotional co-regulation. So the child learns, why reach for this person? Because when I reach, all that happens is I'm going to get more dysregulation, right? Because I'm going to be rejected. So reaching equals rejection is that scenario. Another scenario is a caregiver who is so preoccupied with the emotional state of the child that they are intrusive with their anxiety. So this is a caregiver when the child is upset that is going, "Are you okay? Are you sure you're okay?" So you can guess who that caregiver was as a child. And, okay. But if that is what they do as the pattern, it's intrusive. So the child goes, if I reach, I'm just going to be flooded with my caregiver's dysregulation about my dysregulation.
It's making it worse.
It's better to keep it inside. And this little buddy comes to believe that their emotional needs are burdensome. So they stop reaching very young. This is often before 12 months. This is where the data is done. Yes.
12 months?
Yeah, so you don't even have memories. You have body memories. You have pre-verbal sensations in your body around these experiences, but you aren't going to be able to go. And then trying to get my diaper changed. And this is what they did.
Yeah. Well, in general, is all of this more or less set in stone within 12 months? In my mind, it was like 0 to 7.
So it's not set in stone.
mind-blowing.
This is what I freaking love about attachment. It's not set in stone. It is a flexible system and it can be changed throughout our entire lifetime. So the attachment early on is driven by the caregiver's mind, right? And their nervous system. It's driven by what they believe, what they are capable of, what their circumstances are, what they can offer the child. But that changes. Some caregivers have terrible postpartum depression early on, and then they get help and it shifts, right? Or they're in an abusive relationship and then they're finally able to leave, right? For me, my story is at 9 years old, my mom checked herself into a psychiatric hospital. She suffered from debilitating PTSD and depression, and she went and got help. And that trajectory is why I'm here.
Wow.
That move, that one little move from her, because she could then come home and talk about, here's what's going on, here's what I'm feeling, right? Instead of just going up to bed, taking a Xanax and passing out for the rest of the day.
And you at 9 years old were able to apply that shift to your previous 9
because
years?
she was able to. She made the shift, right? And she created a new pattern. She created a new enough.
And it must have taken you a few years to adjust to that, right?
I mean, I had to go to a lot of therapy. So it wasn't like an automatic shift, and it took a lot of personal work later on to kind of understand all of this and get it to click together. But I think, man, if she hadn't done that, I don't know where I would be. I don't know what would have happened. There was a real gift in her being able to go, there's something wrong here. I need to address it. And me be able to go, oh, there's something wrong. She's struggling.
Yeah.
I'm not doing something wrong.
Yeah.
There's something wrong here.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And it was her who did it. It wasn't like you're, a caregiver who took over for her or something like that. It was the same person who had embedded all that in you.
Well, that leads to my question. My first question is, so you changed, but you changed because you had the benefit of your mother changing.
Yes.
So,
we heal these wounds in relationship.
Right.
So if you have an insecure experience and it has shifted in some way in your life, it's because there's been a shift in that availability for you somewhere. And I see this happen so often for people in marriages and close friendships, your besties, step parents that come in. Step parents get such a bad rap, but man, I've seen some really powerfully healing step parents in the world. Like I've seen the other side too. But I think the experiences, I have this insecure template that developed in my childhood. And I would say it's not set in stone, but I would say it's hardwired. And I like the metaphor of wires because, with stone, it's like, well, what do? You can't break it. You can't remake it. But you can clip a wire here or two and reconnect it to something else and make some adjustments to how things are wired. Mm-hmm. And so we rewire our attachment system in healing relational contexts. Therapists, partners, sweethearts, or parents that heal. I think that was the healing context for me was my mom getting her own source of healing.
Yeah.
So it sounds like to alter your attachment style, it really cannot be done in the classroom. It has to be done in actual real life relationships.
Yes. And we have data on this.
Oh,
Go
really?
ahead.
Oh, and it's also not something you can do just on your own necessarily, just thinking about it hard.
No, because what is an attachment injury? It's about how we relate to others. So, that healing happens in the context of new relational encounters. The way the data is laid out, and we know this from the research of Mary Main and Eric Hesse, it's called the Adult Attachment Interview, is that when a person is able to actively reflect, what was my relational experience in childhood? What were they like, those different experiences? In specific, how did my caregivers respond or not respond to my tender emotional needs and distress? And then, this is the kicker, you have to be able to feel grief about it. You have to actually process the emotions.
Which can be sometimes one of the hardest parts.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What I find is that for most of us, the feelings we weren't able to fully feel in childhood are pretty terrifying. There's this kind of childish sense of, if I let myself go there, will I drown in that sorrow? Or will I, lose hope in those stories? And so there's this kind of like, well, I already made it out of those waters. I'm not going back in there. Right. But if you don't go back in, you really can't figure out what you lost. If you can't figure out what you've lost, you don't know what you need to go forward. And so you do have to go back into those waters. And ideally, you do that with others, because if I can process my tender needs and distress, or my current tenderness about what I didn't get as a child with present caring people, my nervous system receives something I didn't receive back then. And that's like a paradigm shifter. Maybe I'm not too much. Maybe I can rely on other people. Maybe it's going to be okay now.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Eli, I mean, you are a talent.
You're cracking me up. You guys are really good for my self-confidence.
Well, you have a knack for pre-answering questions that I had on
Every
my
time I have a
list.
question, I'm like, she answered it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, good. I'm not done with the patterns yet. So we got to do the last one.
Okay,
because this is really, really important. So the last set of kiddos are kiddos whose parents are so unwell. They might have abusive attitudes because they grew up in abuse, or they might have a serious drug addiction, like I'm talking heroin, meth, not just a little weed here and there, like serious drugs, or severe untreated mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, where the parent is a source of terror for the child. So in those earlier insecure styles, when we're looking at the parents who are, cultivating avoidance or cultivating, anxiety in their children, it's about inadequacy of soothing, but this set of caregivers are actually distressing their children. And so it does something to the attachment instinct, right? So if I'm scared and distressed and my instinct is to get close to my caregiver, all three of those early adaptations were actually about maintaining closeness, even the avoidant. So the avoidant child is not avoidant of attachment. They're avoidant in moments of emotion because they've learned it's not worth it. And they've learned that if I swallow what I feel, then my caregiver will stick by me for longer and I am less likely to be eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. And this is important for any of you who love one of these avoidant bugs, because it is so easy to think you don't care, you don't show what you feel on your face, you don't look like you care, or like you move away when I need you the most, and to feel betrayed by that. But once you start to understand, oh no, this person deeply fears that they are going to flub it all up if they stay in the emotional. They just don't know what to do. And the instinct is the kindest thing to do is just depart for a little while and then come back. But that is an attempt to stay connected, not to be disconnected. So it's a myth that the avoidant person is disconnecting. What they're doing is they are trying to maintain proximity through avoidance of tough, tender stuff. And once you can kind of get that, you can work with it, right?
Yeah.
You can't work with the accusation of you don't care. There's nothing to do. Once that's been, it's like, well, okay, what am I going to say to you?
Yeah.
You can work with like, hey, I think you just moved away. I really actually need you to move closer. I need you to cry a little hard. I need to see more of what you're struggling with, not less. Okay, so you're getting those three things. So with the disorganized child, the attachment system gets scrambled. Because if there's a saber-toothed tiger over here, and my instinct is to run to my caregiver, but my caregiver is a lot like a grizzly bear, what now? Well, I have nowhere to go. So the disorganized experience in attachment is one that's more primal. That child has to go into dissociative states or reactive states If we use those little terms early on, the secure child, reach and receive, the anxious child, reach and reject, the avoidant child would be avoid and distract. Those are all coping strategies for maintaining closeness. The disorganized child is left with shut down and blow up. I am in my distress. I don't feel like there's anywhere I can go. And so these folks get into adulthood and there's lots of messiness around closeness because closeness feels like danger.
And can you describe what that might look like?
It might look like early on, there's lots of fun and flirting and it feels good. But as you start to get closer and you want to ask about their childhood, they storm out of the room and they're pissed at you. And you're like, well, I just wanted to know what that was like for you. Or there's this kind of sense that the way they interpret everything that you're doing is more hostile than it feels for you. Like, I didn't intend that in any way to be hostile, but there's a theory, we call it theory of mind. The way their narrative developed in their head was accusatory. They were being accused. They were unsure of what was happening. And so they enter into close relationships, and close relationships just feel disorienting.
Okay.
So there can be a lot of clinging and a lot of pushing and mixed messages and distorted thinking. And you kind of feel like, what just happened?
Right. Oh my goodness.
Oh, that's scary.
So what would you, is it okay if we move on from there?
Go. I think that's good.
No, you're so good at remembering where you were like minutes ago.
Yeah.
That's a real talent.
I was thinking, is she going to get back to that disorganized?
You knew it.
She fully got
I knew you
that.
were going back.
So a common question we got, when we have hot topic guests on like yourself, we poll our Shandies for questions. We ask them what their questions are, and then we assemble the most common themes. And a very common theme was whether or not, like you've answered the question that some can be more than one type. Is it possible for one to be anxious and avoidant, like in different relationships, like
yes.
Sort of polar opposites, so to speak?
Absolutely. So, I talked about my default setting. My default setting was anxious in regards to my mom, who was my primary caregiver, and I was with her far more than I was with my father. So I think that influenced kind of what that general instinct was. My general instinct in relationships early on was like, do you like me now? Do you like me now? Do you still like me? Are we still good? That was what's happening internally. I could kind of like mask a little bit to seem a little less desperate, but like internally, that's what was happening. But I had an avoidant dynamic with my dad. My dad still to this day struggles with alcoholism. He was fundamentally unable to be a place of refuge for me. And so I learned avoidant strategies with him. And when I got into relationships, I had relationships where people were fairly avoidant. And so, that avoidance would activate more of that clingy vibe inside my nervous system. And then I was with people that had way more clingy vibes than I did. And it was like, whoop. And I remember like watching
so you would
them.
turn into,
Yeah.
Wow, that is so interesting.
Because it's an attempt to regulate the system. So if you think about it, a relationship is a system, right? And in a well-regulated system, there's a going in, there's a going out, there's a connecting, there's a misattunement, kind of these moments, and a return and a repair. But that system is going to be unique based on the individual dynamics brought into the system, right? And so in my nervous system, I had the adaptation for avoidance and had practiced it with my dad. Right? Now, if my dad had been sometimes able to be there for me and sometimes not, I may never have developed that adaptation.
Oh.
And then I may have gotten to a relationship with someone who's preoccupied and just been preoccupied about their preoccupation.
Yeah. Wow. So you actually ended up quite well-rounded.
No, if that's the term. You have to pull my therapist. But I ended up with two different adaptations. Okay. And not everybody does, but some people do. And so for those of you who have gotten into this and gone, I don't know. Sometimes I do this. Sometimes I do that. Well, it's probably according to the dynamic of each relationship you're reflecting on.
Okay. So
and does it have any bearing on the sex of the individual who you had that relationship with?
No.
Oh.
So there isn't a gender correlative because it isn't genetic. It is learned, internalized experience.
So this is entirely nurture.
Right. That's what I was wondering.
Attachment is entirely nurture.
So not a single human has ever been born secure, avoidant, or anxious attachment
Correct.
style.
Wow.
Correct. Now, however, let's nuance it and say this. Every person is born with a different temperament, a different personality. So we have folks that are more sensitive and less sensitive, as an example. We have folks that maybe have autistic traits, as an example. So the nature of a person might affect how their caregiver related to them or didn't relate to them. And so that element of genetics, I think, can then perpetuate some of the dynamics. So let's say you have a child who is, very engineer focused, like their brain is just kind of more in the thought land than the feeling land.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a caregiver that, maybe would have given more attention to emotions, but then like there weren't that many that were shown expressively. And so the caregiver went, well, I guess he doesn't need that. And so they just kind of stopped looking for feelings or helping the child develop that sense of connection around that. And so then that child develops an avoidant pattern. But had that child been born more sensitive and cried and reached in more obvious and overt ways, that caregiver might have been more warm and receptive, and that child experienced a different. So
Okay.
Interesting.
It affects the relationship. And I say that to protect parents because I think not all parent-child dynamics are the same. And there are parents out there who have kids who are more challenging because of how their brain works, how their nervous system works, or just we use the word mismatch sometimes in parent-child dyads, like a deeply sensitive introverted child and a deeply extroverted, socially focused parent who just cannot stop fixating on why does this kid want to be in their room. And so like that dynamic plays out. Whereas if a child had been born to this extroverted parent who wanted to party all day long, they might have been able to develop that synchronicity easier.
Oh, that is so interesting. So I'm curious then, maybe this is a stupid question, but what connection to a caregiver then translates into romantic relationships versus platonic relationships? Like, let's say someone is totally securely attached in their platonic friendships, but in romantic relationships, they are anxiously attached. Is there any way to track which caregiver relationship led to which?
That's a great question. So the reason for that is because the systems, so those neural networks that we develop in our early family belonging, get applied far more into romance than they do into friendship, because romance is where we tend to do our familial belonging. Now, I do see folks get their attachment stuff activated in close friendships. It just sort of depends on the nature of how someone views friendship. So if someone views friendship as you're my family, you're my people, then they're likely to get some of their attachment stuff activated. So the question really is, where do you put your sense of identity relationally? That's probably where your attachment wounds are going to get the most activated. And you might be able to be super chill. Your friend doesn't text you back for 3 hours and you don't even notice. You're not even paying attention. But like your partner, you can see the ... like they read it and then they don't respond and you don't hear back from them for 15 minutes and you're like, Who are they with? What's happening? This is bad. Something's wrong. Right. And that's because you're trying to get something different out of this close attachment relationship than you are out of these other friendships. You're not expecting lifelong commitment in the same way.
I once had a dream that I had great skin. And in that dream, my friend apostrophe came to me. And she said, I can give you good skin if you really want it. All you have to do is go through this quiz about your skin.
Online consultation, Andy, that jingle, that wasn't a jingle. That was a song and it really went awry.
I really didn't know we were starting yet.
Oh, yeah, we were joke starting, but I've decided that this is part of the ad. So Apostrophe is an online platform that connects you with board-certified dermatologists so you have access to prescription skincare without ever leaving your home. You take selfies of your skin, you describe what your skincare concerns are, and then a board-certified dermatologist will review that information and prescribe you prescription skincare if they feel you need it, both oral and topical are options. And you guys have heard me talk about Apostrophe before, but I will quickly talk about what I believe prescription skincare has done for my skin. It's great for acne. It's great for the prevention of lines and wrinkles, the treatment. And for me, it's really cleared up little bumps along my jawline that I used to get. But I mean, I've been using prescription tretinoin for so many years now that I don't even remember. It's honestly been so long since I haven't used it. But I don't know how else to describe like what a difference this has made in my skin. We traveled recently for 10 days. And it's funny how when you pack for a trip, you're like, oh, do I bring my whole arsenal? Like, really? Am I going to bring every single step? I often downsize my skincare regimen when traveling. But one thing that always comes is my prescription tretinoin with 4% niacinamide from Apostrophe.
And you know what? A friend of mine, a lady friend of mine, who cares about her skin deeply, said to me, do you use tretinoin? Because, I'm getting on and my skin looks decent.
Yes.
And I said, yes, I do. I actually do use tretinoin from Apostrophe. And she said, Apostrophe? What's that? And I told her, probably more than she wanted to hear, but I think she's a customer now.
So we have a special deal for our listeners, the Shandies. Right now, you can get your first visit with an Apostrophe provider for only $5 when you go to apostrophe.com/Shandy and enter promo code Shandy at checkout. That is a savings of $15, and this offer is only available to our listeners.
To get started, just go to apostrophe.com/Shandy and click Get Started.
Then use our code Shandy at sign up, and you'll get your first visit for only $5. And we thank Apostrophe for sponsoring this episode. So, Andy, I love a good print now and again and a wild piece of clothing. But I will admit that when it comes to the pieces I reach for over and over again in my closet, they tend to be basics.
And no one does basics better than our good friend Quince.
Our good friend, singular?
Friends.
Oh.
But one of my friends is enveloping me now.
Oh.
Yes.
Is it touching you all over?
Touching me in all the right places.
Okay, your Mongolian cashmere sweater. I am also wearing a cashmere cardigan from Quince. We love Quince here. Their prices are outrageously good. We're talking 50 to 80% off what you would normally see for pieces of this quality and style. Style matters too, because sometimes, you get quality, but you're like, oh, but this looks dated. It doesn't look right. The cut isn't right. Meanwhile, with Quince, they have really modern pieces, and their summer stuff is seriously so cute. They have premium European linen dresses, blouses, shorts from $30. Do you know how affordable that is? That's insane. That is their price every day when you go to Quince. It's such a good source for basics. I cannot stress this enough. Like tank tops, dresses, things that you'll wear over and over and over again, and the quality is there.
And I know what some people are thinking.
Yes.
I know what some people are thinking. We know.
It needs to be addressed.
You would think that they were doing something unethical.
Shady. Yes. Because
scummy.
Scummy because the fashion industry is rampant with scummy behavior.
But no, not shady, not scummy.
Quince only partners with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And how they're able to give you those prices is they partner directly with those factories. They cut out the middleman, basically the brand, that label that you usually pay a huge upcharge for. They cut that party out of the equation.
And you know what? You should be more proud to say I'm wearing Quince than I'm wearing or So get warm weather ready with Quince.
Go to quince.com/Shandy to get free shipping on your order and 365-day returns.
That's QUINCE.com/Shandy to get free shipping and 365-day returns. So just asking for a friend, if you are avoidant in friendships but secure in romantic relationships, what kind of parents did you have?
Were you always secure in your romantic relationships?
Why are you referring to me?
I mean, was this person always secure in romantic relationships?
For the most part.
I would be curious about gender in the way that as a society, depending on who you were trying to make friends with, but as a society, we've made it pretty hard for boys to continue their emotional expression with each other for fear of mockery. Right? The tough guys. I don't know if you all have seen that documentary, GUISE, but the sense that like boys are cut off from being able to identify with their tender emotions around the age of 5 is what the research says. So around the age of 5, boys believe with certainty the statement, boys don't cry. And if you've ever been around a 5-year-old, you know that they absolutely cry, right? So this like strange thing. So I would be curious about that of like, when you're engaging with other males potentially, does that feel different? Okay, when this person, man, I really got to catch this. When this person that you're talking about engages with men, is that more of what activates some of the avoidance versus with female friends?
Yeah, I would have to ask them, but I think the answer is yes.
Definitely.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I feel passionate about this too. And I have a son, and I'm watching this next generation of boys in my area anyway, have access to their emotional world. Mm-hmm. And it's freaking beautiful. Yeah. They take care of each other. They talk about what they're feeling. You know, they sit next to you on the couch and there's no fear of like, this means something. I shouldn't be doing this. You know, there's just this empowerment that's happening around that. And I'm like, I can't wait to watch 20 years from now, like what's happening in their friendships.
Totally.
Because
I feel like you can even see a difference from like baby boomer to Gen X to millennial. Like
I absolutely can see the difference. Yeah, I'm actually jealous of like when I see these 30-year-old guys like hugging each other and saying, I love you, man. Like that never happened when I was, and then the guy I know was, growing up.
Yeah. And then I compare then I compare you to like my dad, who's from this other generation. Mm. It's stark, the difference, like how willing to open up emotionally they are.
It just keeps getting more and more open.
I have a question for a friend.
Yep, I'm ready. I love all these friends.
A platonic question. Could, like, let's say someone is platonically securely attached until an experience that happens relatively late, like later than 9 years old, let's say like 14 years old. Can that, you said that experiences can like shift these things. Yes. So could that cause a person to be avoidant in friendships, like a bad experience?
Absolutely.
So even as late as 14, does it ever stop?
As late as 63. Yeah.
Oh man.
We're relational creatures, and the stories that we most hold about ourselves and our value and our worth are relational stories, and specifically stories about the people closest to us. Right? If Lindsay from high school won't friend you on Facebook, it's like, But if your partner, all of a sudden decides they don't love you anymore, ooh. And they're done with you, right? Like that's a very different internal, external life processing. And so if you have a traumatic experience in a close relationship, however you would define close at whichever stage of life, at 14, your peers are everything.
Yes.
We call that stage of life attachment transfer, because what the child is doing is still having that primary attachment to caregivers, but then learning to transfer that importance of relationship onto their peers. And then slowly getting to the point where they can leave the fold, right? Go off to college, go wherever, and develop close relationships of their own, right? And slowly shifting the role of the parent in their life.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Like we've had like 50 of these.
We've had
topics.
A lot of guests.
Have you ever been able to so vividly see yourself sitting in a petri dish?
No, it's honestly, it's like, it's actually a little emotional.
Yeah.
Like it's very powerful.
I just want to ask this quick question on the spectrum of how difficult it is to change behaviors in therapy or self-work, whatever you want to call it. Where does changing attachment style land on that 1 to 10? Is this like one of the more difficult things to alter in adulthood?
Yeah. Well, let me say this. It all depends on the context. So if you get yourself a therapist who is deeply attuned to you, which that's going to be different for everyone. Like I am not everybody's cup of tea. I am highly attuned. Oh yeah.
That's crazy.
They just don't like tea.
Sweet tea. That experience of synchronicity is another word, and we all sort of know this in our relationships. That feeling where you're with somebody and you just feel like they get it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And you're gotten and you're felt and you're in tune.
It's the best.
It's magical. I actually find myself, I still don't know how to fully put words around what that is. It feels almost like you can't. Like there's a sacredness to this relational flow state you get into with people. And so
I default to the word wavelength, but I don't think it does it justice. But I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's exciting when you find that with anyone, whether it be a therapist or a platonic friend or a romantic partner, it's like
magical.
You remember it.
Yeah.
It makes an impression.
In the neuroscience, we would call it limbic resonance. So your limbic system, your feeling part of your brain, and the other person's feeling part of the brain is lighting up similarly enough to feel like we're in the same state at the same time, right? And that's not you're feeling what I'm feeling. It's like you're feeling my feelings.
Yes.
Ooh. Yes.
When you're seeing a therapist, make sure that you feel some of that with that person. If you aren't feeling that, it's probably time to try on somebody else. And I would say it's a lot easier to heal these things if you feel safe in your present environment. You have a network of people and supports who are about you and, who light up when you come into the room. The people that are like, my man, right? Like you need some of that in the world to be able to go backwards and process the places where you felt like you walked in the room and no one really noticed. Because that's a hard thing to process if it feels like in the present moment, still nobody's noticing. So it is, I don't want to lie to people. It's a complex form of healing, but damn, it's worth it.
Ooh. So would you say then finding people with whom you have that sort of kindred spirit, wavelength connection is forging those relationships, fostering them, investing in those friendships or romantic relationships? Is that actually a form of healing?
Yes. Moving towards the places where you feel connected instead of continuing to try to fix the dynamics that feel disconnected.
Ooh, okay. Well, okay. So here we get to arguably the most common question we got, the most popular question we got. I wrote the big question. Does the anxious/avoidant romantic relationship dynamic ever work? Like, can someone who is anxious ever, I know you're going to say yes, first of all.
Well, because I'm nodding.
I also, just based on this conversation, I know that you're going to say yes. The question is,
how do you know if it's one that will work?
Yeah, how do you know if it's like really worth it? Like, at what point is it, oh, we're mismatched in that way and this is worth working on? Or is it just incompatibility? When you talk about the limbic resonance, at what point is it just not limbic resonance and you're just trying to force something that isn't ultimately healing you because you don't have that connection?
I love this question so much, and I have so many answers to it.
Yay.
So it is not about finding the other puzzle piece. Couples relationships are about finding someone whose heart desires, commitment, rhythms line up with yours in such a way that you feel inspired, hopeful, a little bit nervous in the right ways, but also confident, right? And for those of us who did not inherit a secure attachment, from childhood, we need those dynamics to learn security. Like, we have to have that rub and that conflict in that relationship to be able to recognize, oh, this is my stuff. I'm feeling much younger than I am. I remember being with my partner. So I'm going to tell you about my relationship, because it's always so helpful to hear actual real world experiences.
Totally.
I like to describe the attachment patterns in animals. So if you get my workbook, I do that in the workbook too. But I describe the secure style as the koala, just that vibe of like, we cling together, we climb the trees. Like, there's just togetherness. It's just how we do. It doesn't feel hard or overwhelming. There's not extra labor. For someone with a secure attachment, there's not extra labor to be connected. It just feels natural. Okay. For those who have that anxious pattern, I call it the honey badger. It's like, I'm out for honey. I'm not out for blood. I'm not out for bad things. I want honey, but I need more honey. And I don't actually know how to eat my honey. So I'm like going to ask for more honey and more honey, and more honey. And I'm going to just keep going. And the honey badger gets which ones. Yeah, exactly. And then for the avoidant loves, they're turtles. And there is this, and then I call the disorganized a baby dragon. Because they're really tender on the inside, but they've had to develop scales and fire breathing. And so you have to figure out how to feed the tiny dragon without getting burned. And it's a little tricky. It's tricky for them. It's tricky for you. But with this dynamic of the turtle and the honey badger, the key is that you have to be matched up with somebody who is as committed to their healing as you are.
Oh my God, you just pre-answered a question.
Great. I love this. I feel like I'm winning. Like I'm going to get an award. If both people want to get to secure, then actually the honey badger and the turtle are great for each other. Because the turtle's instinct is, oh, emotional material going in my shell. I will be here until it's over. And the honey badger's instinct is constantly seek out emotional material, look for it, dig for it, try and get more, right? And so what happens is, in order to continue to be together, the turtle has to learn to come out during the emotional moments. And the honey badger has to learn to sit on her hands or his hands.
Which comes first?
Depends.
Okay.
And actually, I think it's kind of more in sync. So when I met my husband, we were both 25. So we were babies. And after about a year of being together, I, as the honey badger, was like, I love you. I want to be with you for the rest of my life. Forever. I'm here. And Trevor was more like, I think it's nice to spend time together. I like it. And we had to figure out what it was in each of our stories that were driving some of that energy, right? Like I had to go a little bit deeper and be like, oh, okay, I'm kind of, I mean, I feel confident. I've always been a fairly confident person. It was just in these contexts that this kind of like more clingy, desperate part of me got activated. And so I had to sort of figure out like, what is this? What is this about? What's getting activated? And, you know, in my childhood, my mom's depression looked like, you know, something's really wrong. She goes away, she lays in bed, she kind of disengages and takes to space and distant. And then I'm with this person who's an introvert and like sometimes just wants to be alone. And my nervous system is like, something's fucking wrong. It has to be. What is it? Right. And eventually he had to get to a place where he was like, kind of like annoyed at me. Like, you have to let me have alone time without interpreting it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, I think I can do that. I think I can. And I was in grad school, which was also very helpful because I had a bunch of friends where we were all over analyzing each other and ourselves all the time. So I had a group of friends that I could go to and be like,
oh, I could picture these conversations.
Oh, yeah.
We're all living together. You know, it was ridiculous. But I had other people. That was also key. I needed other people to help me regulate so that I wasn't constantly fixated on him regulating me through having contact all the time.
Oh, so right? These other friendships could help you in that healing.
Yeah, I would go to one of my good friends. I've seen my good friend Abby, and I'd be like, so I haven't talked to Trevor today, and it's 4:00. Do you think I should text him? And she'd be like, girl, you're overthinking this so hard. Do you want to text him or not text him? I'd be like, I just want to know that he still likes me. And she was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Do you remember last night? Do you remember what happened and the story you told me? She's like, it's already worn off. It hasn't been 24 hours. Then you let the honey wear off, right?
Yeah.
And so I had to do my work of learning to trust the security of the moment. I had a friend who at some point, this was like during the he's not that into you phase of dating advice. Yes. And I had a friend who was like, listen, you're beautiful, you're smart, you're loving. Like he should have put a ring on it already, basically. So I don't know why he hasn't. I think he's just not that into you. But I just had this knowledge in my body. I was like, like when we connect, it's magic. It's just that we don't connect at the frequency that my childhood wounds would like me to. But when I really think about my adult self, I don't want to be with someone 24/7. And actually, I was with those guys, and that was exhausting. And I didn't want that either. So I got to work on some of my stuff. So we kind of simultaneously worked on our stuff. And we went to therapy together. We saw a hilarious therapist who was such an oversharer. It was very funny, but she was very helpful. And I don't know, like over time, the dance changed. And here we are a lot of years later. So we got married in 2010. We got together in 2007. So however many years that is. I'm terrible at remembering anniversaries, by the way.
So are we.
Which is funny.
That's a good sign of a good relationship.
Yeah. I agree. It's like,
tell ourselves.
We mark our relationship all the time in little ways that are more subtle and not grandiose. So anyway, a lot of years. I don't have that feeling at all anymore. Like, and he will come to me when he's struggling. You know, I'm thinking about like we're still wired differently, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. We share our needs. We trust each other. We're in sync. fucking like him. He's a wonderful person. He's so much less extra than I am. If you ever met him, you'd be like, what a wonderful person this guy is.
Oh, that's sweet.
Aww.
Well, so you both made this concerted effort to meet at Secure.
Yeah, he had to learn what his avoidance was about.
Yeah.
And he had to process some of those feelings.
And so what I'm hearing is you cannot make your partner do that.
No, and I tried to make other people before that, for sure. Didn't work.
Okay,
Sure.
so would you say part of compatibility is the other person's willingness to try?
Not just part, I would say most.
Wow.
Most of compatibility is that what I want in terms of relating is what you want in terms of relating.
Oh,
right?
Man.
And then there's those other big things, right? Like, do we want children? Okay, you do, I don't. That's probably not going to work, right? Like there are those big, but the key piece is, do we have the same relational goal, right?
Yeah,
How do you want to be understood, seen, regulated? How do I want to be understood, seen, regulated? And even though it will happen in different ways, like I want to bawl my eyes out and snot all over his shirt when I'm upset and be held and talk about it for at least 2 hours. And when he's upset, he might just like lay his head on my lap for a minute and be like, it was a rough day. And so we're different. It's not that we become the same, but that our goal is the same. Our goal is like, let's get deep and real together and let's heal our shit together.
So your advice then to the countless Shandies who asked some variation on this question would be pay attention to the willingness to meet you in that middle place, that secure place.
Absolutely. You know, I got to that year mark with him, and I had that, friend's voice in my head. And I went to him and I said, listen, I love you. I think there's something really special here. And I want to see it all the way through. But if you don't love me, that's okay. I mean, I wouldn't have really felt okay about it if I was playing it cool. But I need you to let me go find the love I'm looking for.
Yes. And not enough people do that. Can I just say, not enough people do that. Set me free then.
Yeah. Love me. If you can't love me in the way that I want to be loved, love me in the way you can, which is set me free. And he looked at me and he just started crying. He's like, I don't know what's wrong with me. And it wasn't a crying away from me. It was a crying towards me, And it was like, I could tell, I'm like, oh, he's craving to be deeper connected to me and doesn't know how. Like I could feel that. And so I said, okay, let's go to therapy. And he was like, okay.
Wow.
And then we went and we saw Ann Lazaroff in Seattle, Washington. Anyone who has a Seattle location. She was hilarious and very helpful. 5 stars. I mean, there's some caveats, but anyway, but she's awesome. But I think he wanted to go along for the adventure of connection.
Yeah.
And we both had to do some of our work. I had to learn how to separate that anxious little Eli from the present moment. And he had to learn that he could take up space and not be a burden.
Yes.
And that it would build our intimacy.
There was a question that I think applies to a lot of our listeners and a lot of people in general. Is there a mantra or a behavioral cue that you can rest on when you have one of these extremely anxious moments? Like, why hasn't he texted me back? Like, what is that ... What's happening? Where did it go? Like, what do you do in that moment? Because I feel like a lot of people get there and they do the dumbest thing.
I don't say dumbest.
No. Most self-destructive thing.
Keep digging for honey, right?
Yeah.
Like you badger. You badger and you honey badger.
Right.
So one thing I tell people to do is to start a honey journal. So it's less about that moment and it's more about learning how to eat your honey over time. Is that in your anxiety, you kind of journal the moments where honey's not being given, but you don't journal the moments when it's given. So just start a journal where throughout the day, every time your partner or your person offers you something lovely, write it down. And it could be as simple as like, oh, they remembered we needed more toilet paper. Or, it's like, let some of that honey start to change the narrative in your head, because the narrative in your head is about your childhood way more than it is about this relationship.
Right.
And maybe this person isn't enough for you, but like, then you just say, this isn't working for me. Right. So that's why we know it's not about the present. Usually it's usually about like, oh, this loaded instinct to keep seeking. So start this honey journal where you're mindfully paying attention to the security that already exists in your relationship instead of obsessively paying attention to all the potential ways that the relationship might not be secure.
Got it. So it's like almost looking at a picture that you have on the wall of you two loving each other.
Totally.
And if there isn't an inventory, if you don't have a list,
That's
then
not
you
good.
should just
That's
get out.
information.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely. That's huge information.
Yeah.
Right.
That's like, oh, this person might not be able to give me what I need. And if there's something still compelling you there, that's where you have the conversation. Hey, these are the things I need. I need responsiveness. I need some attentiveness. I need blah, 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 blah. And if the person's like, well, I just can't do that, or like, I don't know how to, and that's not my thing, you need to believe them and not try to get them to be something or someone they don't want to be.
Oh my goodness. I
Right.
am nodding heavily at that because my fear was that the wanting to see the best in the other person or wanting to,
Yes.
be optimistic about it could lead you down a path of being overly optimistic. But
And getting stuck in a relationship where you don't get what you need, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
I mean, I always say you cannot be in relationship with someone's potential.
yes,
That does not exist.
Mhm.
So you can only be in a relationship with someone and what you're determining is this relationship giving me the kind of growth, the kind of joy, the kind of belonging, whatever it is? Is it giving me enough of all of those things that I'm willing to cope and work through the ways we both need to grow together, right?
yes.
But if I'm just hitting my head against a wall and not getting what I need, then it's time for me to go. And if I can't go at that juncture, what is the underlying belief I have about myself, right? What is this? So let's put the scenario that someone is anxious and they're getting into that kind of anxiety moment, but they're really with someone that is with them, whether that person has an avoidant pattern or whether that person has a secure pattern or also an anxious pattern. But let's say this really is the type of relationship where both people really want to grow together. Then I would say to the person who's struggling to stay calm in those anxious moments, get a galley of people that understand your relationship, that know your person well enough that they do also think that person is a good person and good for you and trying and ask that galley of people to basically be there for you during those anxious moments to help you regulate so that you're not constantly asking your partner to help you regulate. So you're taking some ownership over your regulation instead of always expecting this relationship to be the place of regulation for you.
And you have more sources.
Yeah. Well, then you gotta make sure you spread it amongst your friends, though,
Yeah.
because otherwise
Totally.
you might lose another relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you're that anxious where like you're burning out all of your friends and your partner, you might also need to be on a medication. Like
Right.
if you cannot calm this or control it using meaning,
Right.
you might also need some extra help, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Wow, Eli. I have to ask you briefly before we set you free, because when we asked Shandies for questions, we're like, this one's good for parents too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously your upcoming book is all about this. But just as a little teaser or an amuse-bouche, what would you tell the Shandies who asked, how do you know if young children are securely attached? And then, of course, probably the most popular question, which is tips for establishing secure attachment in your
Ooh,
child.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you.
Not-
I got a good sound bite for all of this. Okay, keep going.
Okay.
While not pampering them, I have to add.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the sign of security is really in those tender, distressing moments. And I want to clarify that those are not angry moments. So if your kid's upset because you said no, they can't have a play date today and they run off into their room and they slam the door, that's not where you're assessing your attachment relationship to them. That's just childhood and limits and boundaries, and it's hard. It's really like when they are deeply tender, they're super sad, they're super scared, they're in a place of feeling confused or disoriented. Do they seek you out? Mama, Dada, Papa, whoever, is their instinct to find you as a place of regulating? And then once they find you and they're in your arms, do they easily soothe? Now, this is again tricky because if it's 9 p.m. and they should have been asleep an hour ago and they haven't had that much to eat, they're probably not going to soothe very easily. So, as a scientist, I don't know that I can really call myself a scientist, but I am trained in this one particular research protocol called the strange situation. So I kind of consider myself that. But, I'd really want the laboratory to be able to do the assessment. But I would say in general, you're asking yourself the question, am I reliable for my children? Am I reliably regulated? And I don't mean perfectly regulated, Am I reliably regulated so that when they are tender, they know I got them. I will help them. I'm going to be there. I can help them feel their feelings and we'll get through it together. And at the end of it, we will melt together. And when there is disruption or disconnection or misattunement or asynchronicity, do I, as the caregiver, take the lead and repair? Those are the surefire signs that you've got secure stuff going on. And luckily the data says if that's happening, if that synchronicity and support is happening 30 to 50% of the time, you have a secure attachment.
I have to ask this follow-up, which is the kind of person who asks this question, buys your book, reads your book. Are those the type of people who even really need to work? Like, what I guess my point is, how self-aware is the kind of parent who does not raise securely attached children?
Oh, that's a great question. It's really about knowing your story. So, if you have really taken the time to reflect on your own growing up, then you've probably gotten your nervous system more regulated. Yeah. And then you're probably going to have more of an instinct for how to respond in those tender moments because you've really reflected on what didn't happen for you, what you needed. So, I mean, it's a whole variety. Like someone could be asking that question because they're in that preoccupied parent state. Is my kid okay? Is my kid okay? Are you sure my kid's okay? And my answer would be, your kid is more okay than your brain thinks. And the best thing for your kid is to really work on letting go of that need to constantly scan your kid because they're picking up on your anxiety about their health. So we're going to need to reel it back in a little bit.
I imagine that's just as hard to adjust.
And maybe even harder sometimes because it's like for the kid. I don't know. It's hard. But it's possible. Okay, so the first book I wrote, I'm going to give you that. I'm going to answer the second part of that question. But the first book I wrote is a workbook that is designed for that. So if you're a parent and you're like, yeah, I haven't really worked through my childhood stuff. I was kind of hoping I didn't have to do that. I would say go get the workbook first. Because when you read the second book, there's a whole section. There's a whole chapter called They Can Feel What We Don't Heal. So as much as we can not tell our children about hard stuff in our lives, if we have not faced it and allowed ourselves to feel the feelings and to resolve it in our nervous systems, our kids pick up on it. They don't know what it is, but they feel it and they inherit it as a result. So we do have to do our work. I'm so sorry. It's like, I didn't want to go back to those waters.
The only way out is through.
Amen. That's right. The cure for the pain is the pain. And I don't mean like, Keith Raniere pain. I don't mean like you go through something really awful on purpose. I mean, you have to let yourself feel the grief and the grief will move you.
Is the grief as bad as you think it is?
No, because you already lived through the hardest part. Being a little person in a place where you feel insecurely connected is way harder than being a grown-up processing what you felt as a child. You can do this. Okay, let me do the 4 things, okay? First thing you're going to do is you're going to show up. You're going to show up when your kids are in their tenderness and in their triumph. I'm going to help you ride a bike and I'm going to cheer, cheer, cheer when those pedals start going. I'm going to be there when you get your heart broken and I'm going to hear you and I'm going to believe you and I'm not going to tell you you're too young to be in love. I'm going to show up for you in the moments where you need me to care for you and celebrate you. 2, I'm going to listen up. I'm going to spend my time as a parent listening to who you are, what you feel, what you're going through, what your perspectives are. You are going to feel in proximity to me that what you think and need and articulate about the world matters to me. 3, I'm going to light up. When you come into the room, I am the happiest, waggliest, slobberiest golden retriever because I love to have you near me. Because there's nothing more secure in the world than knowing we are wanted, right? And then when I flub on one of those 3 things, I'm going to make up. I'm going to come back around and say, I'm so sorry that I was obtuse to what you were needing. I'm so sorry that I was harsh. I'm sorry that I was disconnected. I'm sorry that I was on a phone call. All of us are going to be apologizing for that through this stage of life. I, as a caregiver, am going to model for you, my child, that you and I can handle the bumps of life and we can get back on track when things get off track. Now, in that vein, I am not saying you have an emotional reaction. I give you what you ask for. That's not what I'm saying. I mean, Children cannot make decisions about nutrition. They cannot make decisions. I mean, okay, we could get into debates about this, but my children can't. My children would absolutely just like eat themselves sick with candy for the rest of their lives because they're like me. Because I also have to kind of regulate the candy consumption.
I also have the sweet tooth.
Yeah, you're the only two
And
people.
you know what's funny is I totally got it from my dad.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
100%. There's no
It
question.
might be genetic, though, in your
Oh,
family.
yeah, that could be genes. Who knows? I don't know. Oh my gosh, I love sweets so much. But anyway, so we want to give our children high structure, which means I am going to cultivate boundaries and limits that are developmentally appropriate for you so you can grow and learn and handle these things on your own when you're ready. And I'm going to be predictable about that so that you don't have to wonder, is today the rule? What's the rule? How do I know? I'm going to set those things up and I'm going to stay clear with them. And I'm going to give you high nurture, which is all those other things. Because when a child feels nurture, they feel loved. And when a child feels structure, they feel confident because structure helps children understand where the walls are and where the stairs are and how they get from one place to the next. So that's not permissive, which is what people are so afraid that this message is. It's like, no, my kids are absolutely permitted to feel their feelings. Mm. But that doesn't mean they get the popsicle right before dinner.
Yeah.
So now hearing this and reading your book, no one has an excuse for being a bad parent anymore.
I don't know. You start listening to human stories and it doesn't take long to go,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I could see how that was hard and made it.
So I have to play devil's advocate for 1 second. Am I allowed to?
You are. I mean, we're at
Always.
overtime. Do you have time for devil's
I'm
advocate?
fine.
Okay, just one. You did say that a lot of the stuff is implanted before 12 months.
In the relationship.
In the relationships, right. So if your child is nonverbal,
yes,
because they're so young, how can you apply this stuff that you're talking about? Those 4 things, a lot of those really involve a verbal individual, someone who can have a conversation with you. So what do you do if you have a baby who's crying all the time or always terrified or always too hyperactive, like in public places? And like, what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to always cater to the crying? Are you supposed to always, like, if they're sad? But because in my mind, like this, and I'm sure that this is a common belief among many people, that a baby learns very early on that crying can get it what it wants, and before it even knows anything.
I love you for bringing this up because it's so pervasive in how we all think. It's a behaviorist idea about brain development. But a baby is not thinking causal in that way. A baby is not going, if I cry, this is the strategy, and then I can get the grown-up to come here. Crying is the first human language. So when a baby cries and we respond, what's happening is their internal world is getting connected to us, therefore validating that it exists, and they're learning that I am not alone. I don't have to carry these things by myself. And the data says the more responsiveness a baby gets, the more well-regulated they are as an adult. And we have longitudinal studies on this. So it's actually, sometimes we call it the attachment paradox. So if I'm 3 and I have a caregiver who helps me regulate, sees me fall down and comes to me and helps me, then by the time I'm 7, I'm more likely to be the kid in the class who can sit in my seat and wait patiently for what's coming next. And now this obviously does not mean like, therefore, if a kid can't sit in their seat at 7, it means they had an insecure attachment. It doesn't mean that. There's lots of other reasons why a kid can't sit still in their seat at 7 years old. But it is more likely that the brain will develop a higher or thicker capacity in that prefrontal cortex or the executive functioning if the experience is caregiving and warmth. So let's say you have a colicky baby. You want to respond and you want to have a freaking community behind you. You need to have a grandma that comes over every day if you can, or a neighbor, or, a good friend or a partner. Like, you need to have people that are helping you regulate because you're doing a black belt level of regulating an infant. So that experience as a caregiver, that's that temperament thing. So I have a baby that's more sensitive, which I have twins. How crazy is that? I have a 9-year-old and I have twin 4-year-olds.
Whoa.
And one of my twins was born with a hole in her heart right before COVID. And they told us to look out for respiratory disorders. And she's a highly sensitive child. And she would only breastfeed if I was walking. Okay.
Ooh.
Wow.
So, I mean, I have had the experience of the high needs baby. And she's now 4.5, and she is the freaking chirpiest, cutest little munchkin you've ever met. She looks like a little elf. I can't even describe the joy that her body exudes. But there were like a good 3 years where it felt like she was breaking my brain. But I knew, I had the knowledge. I'm like, she's just a sensitive kid. And I just got to keep going. Like, because I know the more she experiences mirroring, the more she experiences care, compassion, and support, the more well-regulated her brain will be, because it won't be allocating resources to the amygdala, basically, because she won't feel as scared. She might still feel as dysregulated because she's sensitive, but she can feel that I'm there. And because she can feel that I'm there, she is going to internalize her worth, her needs as non-burdensome, and then enter into a world. I mean, you should see her play with babies. You're sad. Mama's got you. Right? Like, she knows that, right?
Oh, wow.
She's not telling her baby, stop that.
Wow.
Stop that.
So the advice you're giving, to boil it down, is unless your infant is doing something wildly inappropriate in a public setting, you should always be there for them when they are in those
Even if
tender
they're doing
moments.
something wildly inappropriate, you set the boundary. You know, like, well, so my other daughter, kind of a wild card, but like, she's a bit of a nudist. So, you know, I'm thinking of a situation recently where we had our family was all over for a holiday, and I look over on the couch and she's got her underwear down and her butt up in the air. And she thinks potty humor is the funniest thing in the whole world. I mean,
As
it
she
is.
should.
I mean, it
Butts
is. It's
all the
very
time.
funny. I
And
do too.
And, you know, and I look over and I can see my like 28-year-old male cousin going, fuck, like, what do I do now? Right? Like, there's a child with her vulva up in the air, right? Like, you know, I'm going downstairs and I'm like I'm like, whoop, sorry, ma'am. No, ma'am. We keep our underwear on when, you know, we're not in the bath, like putting that back on. And I'm regulating, but I'm also instructing, I'm guiding. Now, let's say she
and
was
not shaming.
Right. Not shaming. That's the
trying
key.
not to.
Right.
I'm not a
That's
perfect
tough.
parent. I
That's
definitely
tough.
have my moments, but I'm
To
trying
me, that's not
to.
shaming, though. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
parents might say or do something in
Yeah.
that
Like,
situation.
what's wrong
that
with
is
you?
shaming.
What are you doing? You're an
Yeah.
animal.
Yeah. Well, we project sexuality onto kids sometimes, where it's like, that was sexual, but it wasn't sexual. She just literally is like airing her butt and feels great and she thinks it's funny.
Oh.
But, you know, but I'm also helping her understand that that's something we don't do. Now, let's say she fought me on that. Let's say she's throws her underwear up in the air, takes her dress off and starts heading off, which is not out of character for her. I am going to go and help her get dressed. How that process looks depends on how hungry is she, how tired she is, what kind of a brain leap she's in. I am always responding to tenderness. I am always guiding as much as I can. You know, there's a moment in time sometimes where you're like, fuck it, I can't do anything about this right now. I'm too tired. You know, every parent has that. But in general, yeah, I'm responding. I'm helping. I'm not ignoring. I'm not shaming. I'm teaching my children, you exist, your feelings exist, your needs exist, and so do these boundaries and limits. They can all coexist.
You should do full day rentals. You should just be there. Like, you know, the guy in the Progressive commercials, like not to be your parents. You should just be there next to them the whole day.
Yeah.
Someday, I've had talks with some people about someday trying to do like there's like the Super Nanny show where like she kind of shows the opposite of what I'm
my
talking
God,
about.
you are perfect for that. Yes.
Yeah.
Like, we got to do the opposite. Like, let's really help people understand how this actually looks. Because I think if you were watching me, you'd go, oh, okay, that is really different. That isn't. I'm okay. You know, I think we have this image of compassionate parents lacking authority. But a secure parent absolutely is the grown-up. They're just not obsessed with being the boss, or on the opposite end, obsessed with their children approving of their behavior, right? Like, my children don't need to approve of my choices, but they also don't need to like deeply memorize that I'm in charge. Like, they know I'm in charge. Clearly I'm in charge.
Right.
Wow. Eli Harwood, my goodness, what a thrill this was. I love it when we end up going completely off script.
Yeah.
Like, we got to some of the main questions, but when it feels like a conversation, you just make our job so easy. What a gift. Thank you.
And I will say, if there ever should be a part 2, we would love to have you back on.
Yes.
I'd love to. I'm in. We can get real creative too on what we do with it.
Yeah.
We could even have you could have me come on when you have a double date, and I could help you talk to another couple about their attachment dynamics. I could just observe for a while.
Oh my goodness.
I love this.
She's on Zoom just like silently when she comes in, like surprise. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will set you
Thank
free.
you for having me. Such an honor.
Okay.
Have a great night.
You too.
Squarespace, where a beautiful website is made. Did I get there?
So Squarespace, it is indeed where a beautiful website is made. What is there to say about Squarespace that we have not already said, Andy?
There is nothing left to say, but maybe some people here haven't heard our Squarespace ads.
Okay.
So let's tell them afresh.
Can I say that Squarespace is life-changing? Can I say that? Is that going too far?
It's definitely life-changing.
In our case, between the two of us, we have several websites using Squarespace. I've said before that our wedding website, Shandy.nyc, was on Squarespace. My blog, alltheprettypandas.com, Squarespace. My singing website, charlenejoint.com, Squarespace. Dear Shandy, this podcast's website.com. Also Squarespace. I mean,
proof is in the pudding.
Proof is in the pudding.
No one could say we're bullshitting.
No.
And it's because they're simply the best.
The best at what they do. Squarespace is a platform where you can go and design a gorgeous, professional-looking website with little to no design experience. And it's at the point where Squarespace is such the destination that even designers build their websites on Squarespace.
Squarespace is the new language of website building.
Totally. So with Squarespace, they really hold your hand through designing this website. You can pick one of their beautiful templates to choose from. They have different names and they look so chic. And then after that, they have all these features that's through the roof. They have mailing lists, they have member areas, they have blogs, they have gallery options, they have e-commerce, you can sell product, they have scheduling, you can be booked through Squarespace. I mean, it's endless. Whatever you need, they have it.
And it's like doing some renovation in your home. If you do it yourself, if you have time, you always feel much better about it. You're like, look at these walls. I painted these walls. It's like Squarespace. You can actually build your own website and say, look at that. It's a working, beautiful website that I built. And you feel so proud. It's an accomplishment.
I have to admit, I do feel a sense of pride. Like,
right?
Yeah, I really, over dearshandy.com, when I look at it, I'm like, I made that. Yeah, it makes me feel good about myself.
Yeah, go look at that website. She built that. Does she look like a web builder?
What's that supposed to
I don't know what that means. But she's not. She's not one. A lot of talents. That's not one of them.
So head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Shandy to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Again, that's squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Shandy for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Oh, wow. My goodness.
I am shook.
Shook. That was unbelievable.
I want her. I want one of her here. Can we just get her?
I want to be friends with her. I want to get drinks with her. I want to go to dinner with her. Yeah. She's all the things. She's like a decadent dessert.
Do you think we're just waiting in line? You think everyone says this about her?
Probably.
Or maybe we just had a real connection.
She has almost 600,000 Instagram followers. So yeah, I think I don't know if we're famous enough for Eli Harwood. All right.
But she was delightful.
And you know what I will say about her? She's not the kind of person to care how many Instagram followers you have.
Oh, she doesn't care at all. She probably doesn't even know. She's like, oh, I have followers?
Well, you can tell there is such passion behind her message, like behind her research. Everything she has at the tip of her tongue, it's not because it's just well studied. It is well studied, but it's not why she does this.
You know what's beautiful about what she's doing in her is that she didn't start doing this to discover herself and fix her problems. She fixed her, to some extent, fixed her problems first. And it was like, wow, that was really amazing. I want to devote my life to that thing that happened.
There were so many questions I wanted to ask
her. There was too many. I was overwhelmed and all I could say is stupid things.
Plus whenever there was like a slight, like she'd come to the close of her answer, you and I were both like,
ready to pounce. But then she'd say something else super poignant. And I was like, I can't interrupt that.
Yes.
So it was a lot. It was like a giant funnel of information. And the thing is, often.
and we were like on the receiving end.
Yeah, we were just like, I was. It's like people shooting hot dogs at me. Like, wait,
And you're just trying to like catch what you can.
Yeah. But I feel like everything she said, and this is not like, we have great guests on this podcast.
Yes.
I love all our guests.
We're very
Every
lucky.
single guest.
Yes.
Some better than others, but they're all great.
Yes.
Every single thing she said was like it was like a fresh food. It's like I've been to going to a restaurant where like every dish, you're like, oh my God, how have I never tasted anything like this?
Yes, every dish, even though like she might have said something here or there where you're like, oh yeah, I did know that. I didn't know that one piece.
It was based on prior knowledge, but
Yeah,
it made it more. It was like, oh, let me put some citrus on this
some
like
yuzu
burger. It's like that was a terrible example.
No, I mean, maybe it could work in the hands of the right chef. Sure. No, it's true. There were so many dishes she served up where I was like, I've never tasted anything like that before. But not only that, you were like, that brings me back to my childhood.
Right. And I feel like, I mean, we'll talk about this later, but I honestly feel like I fixed something right here without even talking about it. I didn't even say anything. I was just like, oh, it's fixed.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I figured something out.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we both probably know.
Yeah, and I also, I think I
know.
learned something too. I mean, when we each asked questions for friends, when she talked about platonic and romantic relationships and how she said it, like a lot of it came down to how you categorize which friendships in your life, like where do you crave the most connection or where do you prioritize connection? What feels like family to you? That was so interesting to me because it goes to show that like that first of all, there's so much self-work in this, but even the categorization of something can be adjusted on your end.
Yes. Yes.
Did that make sense? Did you get that?
I did get it.
Oh, I love you. Thank you.
Can I tell you the thing that I realized?
What?
It's pretty insane.
Can
I tell you the story?
Are you okay with everyone knowing?
Yeah. I mean, it's not embarrassing. It's actually it's a thing.
Okay.
So when I was a kid, like a really young kid, like first, second, third, fourth grade, I guess fourth grade kids stopped crying, but I never cried ever. Like every time a kid got a cut or banged their knee or got into a fight or like something fell on their head, they'd start crying. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at these kids like, what's wrong with you? Like I never cried once through that entire period. But I did cry once at day camp when I was 6 years old. And I cried because somebody pushed me. I remember this. And the person who made fun of me for crying was the cool kid. Imagine at 6, the cool kid.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's hilarious. That I wanted to be friends with. And he mocked me, said, look at you, you crybaby. Oh. And I realize now that altered my relationship with male friends.
Yeah.
And I shut down my emotions when interacting with male friends. And the school that I went to when I never cried was an all-boys school.
Yeah. Wow. Oh
yeah, it wasn't my mother. My mother's off the hook for this one. For once.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Andy.
Yeah, was that? I mean, I'm pretty sure that's
you've told me before that you never cried when you were little, and I think there was probably some messaging you got in general. I think a lot of men of your generation got similar messaging. Be tough, be a man. Cry baby.
But I cried at home.
Oh, you did?
I cried at home with my family, but I didn't cry with my friends. I didn't cry amongst men or boys.
Yeah.
Ever.
Isn't it funny that 6-year-old? Like he's probably some dude out in the world now.
He's whatever. He's working in IT somewhere.
IT.
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably him even saying "cry baby" was probably something that was put on him at some point.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, it's maybe he cried and someone called him a crybaby.
Yeah,
he was just paying it forward.
I think he was a year older than me. He was like an older. He was a 7-year-old. Wow. He was a man.
Yeah. Should I share my friendship story?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Well, when I was asking for a friend, it was actually me.
No.
Yeah, and I actually think that I didn't have issues with friends growing up. I had 2 sisters. I mean, I certainly had other issues, but it wasn't something that stressed me out. I always felt like a bit of a misfit, but not in a like I can't get by kind of way. Like I had friends. And then when I went to high school, I was automatically friends with the people I had been in elementary school with. But I always sort of felt like a little bit on the outs, like they were just sort of tighter with each other because, like, again, I always felt like a bit of a misfit, but I always was included, And then there was one weekend where they so it was 5 of us, where they booked a trip to see the Backstreet Boys in Montreal, and they didn't invite me.
Oh, yes, I've heard of this.
And I was devastated. And when I asked, I was like, why wouldn't you invite me? Like, the 4 of you are going, you didn't even invite me. Like, these are friends I hung out with every single day. And they came out that they were trying to keep it from me. And they were like, well, we know you don't like the Backstreet Boys that much. And then it was like ... Plus it was harder to get a hotel room for 5 people instead of 4. And that experience changed me. Like, wow. it to this, I'm still like unpacking that one.
Wow.
And I think it turned me quite avoidant in my platonic female friendships. Yeah. And I've been like actively working on it in this chapter of my life, but wow. And it's funny, that didn't really come up for me until I started therapy with my therapist, who I feel that kinship with, that she mentioned.
Oh, it's so interesting. God, these experiences that turn you. It's just that you're telling yourself this story. It's BS. It's like this one person said that, so you're going to now do that for everybody?
Yeah, you give it so much weight, right?
It's so absurd. But it's just like, as she said, it's a saber-toothed tiger. You know, back in the day, our brains have evolved a bit, but they're pretty much the same brain from 100,000 years ago. And back then, there wasn't a lot to think about except get food, don't die of cold, and don't get eaten by that tiger. And that's all we really need to know. So back in the day, like, you know, a reaction like that becomes permanent was probably accurate to some degree.
Yeah.
Because everyone was behaving in linear ways. It was very predictable.
Totally.
So anyway. Case closed.
Anyway. Wow. I mean, I don't even know if I have anything to add to that. She was just so great. I'm also tired. That was like really like a lot of usage of the brain.
A lot of my energy was spent trying to stop myself from talking. Like, I was just like, I wanted to say so much. And I was like, no, you have to listen. This is a time for listening.
Yes. And also, like, she was also such a good active listener. There was so much active listening going back and forth, because I felt like if I turned off for 1 second, then I missed something of high value.
Right? I was like, I've never had to listen so hard. It's like every word. I was like, can I not take a break? Are there no asides here?
Okay. I think we'll wrap there, because maybe people are sick of listening to us. Yeah.
No, but that, you know who's talking? The person who didn't get invited to NSYNC.
Oh, Backstreet Boys.
Whatever, same thing.
No, but seriously, that changed me. Yeah. Like, after that, I formed other friendships, and like I became more reclusive socially. Like, I became more of a survivor. Like, socializing became survival. It wasn't just, oh, these are my people.
But you still love the Backstreet Boys.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's like, I like the Backstreet Boys fine. It wasn't the point. It annoyed me at 14 years old that they used that as an excuse. They're like, oh, we know you don't like them. It's like, that's so not the point. Anyway, can you tell I'm
but
still...
you do like the Backstreet Boys.
I mean, I do.
Nice try.
Just playing it all cool.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone likes the Backstreet. Everyone should like the Backstreet Boys.
In no setting ever with you has a Backstreet Boys song come on and you have not sang at least one verse.
Yeah. I mean, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
Plus, I don't know the lyrics to many songs. And so when I do know the lyrics to a song.
You go for it.
Yeah, I go for it.
Yeah, I like that in you.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay. I think this is a wrap.
I think it is.
If you enjoyed what you heard today, you know what we will ask of you. And that is to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow us on Instagram, and
TikTok.
Leave us Apple and
Spotify
podcast ratings and reviews. Tell your friends, and generally do all the things you would do to support a podcast you enjoy. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Dear Shandy. Bye-bye.